Okay. Well, it is Christmas. It is the Advent season, and thank you, ladies, for that, for Rachel and for Sadie, for helping us with our candles and our readings today. And so we're in the season of preparation, where we're anticipating the birth, the coming of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and we're in part 2 of our message series called "The Gift," where we're looking at the 3 different gifts that the Magi or the wise men gave to Jesus. Now, if you visualize the nativity scene, you probably picture these wise men right there next to baby Jesus or somewhere around him there in the manger, but unfortunately, they weren't actually there. They arrived later when Jesus was anywhere from a couple months old to a couple years old, maybe 2 or so. They also most likely were not 3 of them, but many of them, and they were well armed, and they were most likely these guys, these priests from an astrological religion in Persia. And so I know that kind of changes the visual. If you start to picture now the nativity scene without the wise men, and you picture a bunch of these well-armed priests from this other religion coming and bowing down and offering their gifts to this little toddler. Now, how do you imagine that scene went with the little toddler? I don't know if you've ever had a 2-year-old. Anybody ever had a 2-year-old before? Well, I've had 3 of them, and 2 of them were at the same time. So when I picture this scene, I picture what we used to try to do to keep our kids happy in restaurants and in Walmart, right? I mean, that was a big challenge, trying to keep them from destroying the place. But you know what I learned in that season and in those couple seasons? I learned a valuable lesson for life. Never negotiate with terrorists. That's what I learned. It's important, and I take that with me everywhere I go now with my children. You cannot negotiate with a 2-year-old. So these magi, they were brave, and they bowed down and offered their gifts to this toddler. So let's go back where we were last week, and let's read from the book of Matthew about when these wise men came on the scene, and then we'll talk about one of the specific gifts that they gave. So Matthew 2, verse 1 says that Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." And if we skip down to verse 11, they entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, these would be unusual gifts in our day and age, but back then they were really valuable gifts and really useful gifts back in Jesus' day. And they also have a symbolic, prophetic meaning about who Jesus would later become. So there's a prophetic nature to this scene here. So last week we talked about frankincense and how it symbolizes Jesus as our high priest, and how he would give his life to pay for the sins of humanity and serve as that mediator, that in-between. He's also our high priest who can sympathize with us and understands what we go through and knows about our pain and our suffering and our situations. So next week we're going to finish our series. We're going to talk about the gift of gold, which symbolizes the kingship of Jesus. But today we're going to talk about the gift of myrrh, which is probably the least known about as far as these 3 gifts. Myrrh, just a little bit of info, is this gum-like resin that is extracted from various types of these small thorny trees. And so like frankincense from last week, it also has a variety of uses. In pharmacology, myrrh is used as an antiseptic in mouthwashes and in toothpastes and things like that. It's also used in some salves that you can apply to minor scrapes and cuts on the skin. Myrrh has also been used as a painkiller for things like toothaches, for bruises, for aches, for sprains, things like that. Myrrh gum, as it's called, is commonly claimed to remedy things like indigestion and ulcers and colds and coughs and asthma and lung congestion and arthritis pain and even cancer. And so, like last week, I can't verify that these claims are totally true, but if the internet says it, then we know somebody thinks it's true. So there you go. I actually have some myrrh today, like we did last week with frankincense, and so I want to get that out again in the same little candle thing. They've taken some myrrh and made it into a little square, and so let me light this candle and get it going. Anybody smell it last week if you were here? This tiny little thing, believe it produced all of that? So that I don't feel like I'm choking this week, I'm going to move it farther away from me, because it was powerful right here next to me. But for now, I'll put it here and let it start, and then we'll move it here in a minute so I don't pass out and die. Okay. Myrrh is actually referred to 17 times in the Bible. And one of the most popular times is when Jesus is on the cross, and the Roman soldiers that are there, they offer him wine that's mixed with myrrh. And that was so that it would dull the pain, but Jesus rejected it. He was wanting to bear the full force, the full weight of our sins without trying to dull the pain and get relief. But the most common use for myrrh in ancient times was to use it as an ingredient in the embalming process of a dead body. In fact, John 19:39 tells us that a man named Nicodemus, who was a Pharisee, who normally Pharisees would not support Jesus, but this one did. He's actually the guy Jesus was talking to when he said in John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life." That's the most famous verse in the Bible, but we don't often know the context that he was actually speaking to Nicodemus. And so later on in John, in chapter 19, verse 39, we find that Nicodemus, after Jesus is crucified, he brings a 75-pound bag of ointments and things like that, and perfumes, one of which was myrrh, to prepare Jesus' body for burial. So here's the connection. Myrrh represents Jesus as the suffering servant. It represents him as the suffering servant, or we would say the Lamb of God, who was born to die for the forgiveness of our sins. So let's see if our myrrh is smelling. Yep, yeah, I can start to smell it. Let's see. How about Peyton and Riley? You guys want to come up today? You can be our volunteers, or voluntold, I guess. But come on. See what you think. Don't worry, you guys will all be smelling it in a minute. But what do you think? What's that smell like? That's myrrh.
Kind of cinnamon.
Cinnamony? Okay.
Yeah, I got the same thing.
Same thing? Cinnamon. So you guys are both final answer, cinnamon smell? Do you think it's better than last week or worse? Frank, better? We're going with myrrh, frankincense. We're getting it out. Okay. Yeah. Good to know. Hey, would you mind taking that and putting it way over there for me? That would be good. Whoop. Yep, it's hot. Yes. Fire hot, Peyton. Fire hot. Thank you, guys. Can we give them a hand? They did a great job. You guys would be great at being food critics and, smell it and understand it, the layers of smell. Yeah, cinnamon. Yeah, I could see that. So now let's look at an Old Testament passage from the prophet Isaiah that we referenced earlier, that Rachel referenced earlier and Sadie read. It's Isaiah chapter 53. So if you have a Bible, you can get ready to turn there. It describes how Jesus is actually the suffering servant. But before we read it, there's an important fact about the book of Isaiah that we really need to remember and consider when we're reading this passage. So let me put things in perspective in a way that we can relate to today by asking you a question. How many of us are into football? Do we have any football fans here today? Yeah, we got a lot, right? Okay. Now imagine if I had the power to predict the two teams that are going to be in the Super Bowl in a couple months when this season is over. If I knew and I could predict it, and sure enough, it would come true, that would be pretty good. But maybe you could say, well, you're kind of lucky. It's the end of the season, sort of, and you kind of get an idea who's going to be in the playoffs, and so maybe you could make an educated guess. But imagine if I could predict who would win and what the final score would be. That's pretty good, right? The Super Bowl coming up, if I could say who's going to be in it and who wins and what the final score would be, that would be pretty mind-blowing that I could get that right. Now, let's just say that in 700 years from now, that somehow the world is still here, right? And football is still as popular or more so than it is today. What if I could predict the two opposing teams in the Super Bowl 700 years from now, in the 2723 Super Bowl? If I could tell you which two teams would be in it, and I could tell you the exact score of the game, that would pretty much make me a prophet, right? An amazing, incredible, supernatural prophet. Well, Isaiah pretty much basically does the same thing here in this book of Isaiah. He prophesied 700 years before the birth of Christ. And he gave this detailed account of what the suffering servant, Jesus, would endure on our behalf. So let's look at Isaiah 53. But first, let's start by looking just at verse 6, because verse 6 highlights our problem and our situation. And then we'll look at the solution for our problem afterwards. So Isaiah 53, verse 6, just simply says, "All of us, like sheep, have strayed away. We have left God's paths to follow our own." That's our problem. In a nutshell, Isaiah lays it out for us. Now, he says that we're like sheep. And unfortunately, that's not a compliment. He's not telling us how amazing we are. If he had said we are all like lions, okay, maybe that'd be a compliment. Or if we're all like eagles, then he'd be telling us something good about ourselves. But no, when he compared us to sheep, he was basically saying that we're not the brightest crayons in the box, okay? Because you can train a lot of animals. You can train a dog. You can train a horse. You can train an elephant. You can train a pig. You can even train a cat, maybe. I don't know. But have you ever heard anybody say, "Hey, why don't you come over and we're going to show you our pet sheep and all the tricks he can do"? Anybody ever heard that? I've never heard that. Because that's not what they do. Can't train a sheep. You don't go to the circus to watch the sheep show. Sheep are basically known for three things. They're weak, they're witless, and they're wayward. They're weak because they're pretty much defenseless. If an animal like a coyote or a wolf or some kind of predator like that comes after a sheep, how can a sheep defend itself? They don't really have big sharp teeth that they can show. They don't have quills that they can shoot. They're not fast. They can't fly away. They don't blend in. They don't have any kind of poisonous venom or anything like that. They're just basically sitting there asking to be killed and eaten. That's the life of a sheep. But not only are they defenseless, they don't even know how to scatter in different directions. They just kind of huddle up together like all the items on a buffet. Just all clumped together. So they're not very bright. Sheep are also witless. They don't think for themselves. They tend to follow the crowd. If one sheep does something dumb, the other sheep, they do it too. In fact, this is a true story from the Turkish media that was later reported by Fox News in an article on January 13th, 2015, that in 2005, in the country of Turkey, 1,500 dumb sheep followed each other off of a cliff. Now, I don't know, I'm thinking, if I'm a part of that group, I'm thinking after 20 or 30 or maybe 100 of them, that one of the sheep at some point had to say, wait a minute, I don't think this is a good idea. But no, can you imagine seeing 1,500 sheep just running off of a cliff all together? Some dumb sheep. But here's the strangely funny thing, and it's actually kind of morbid, that only 450 of them died. Why? Because the dead ones formed a pillow on the ground, and the other 1,050 of them lived because of the cushion of their dead brothers and sisters. I mean, what? You can't make this stuff up. So sheep are weak, and they're witless. They're also wayward, and wayward means that they wander. When the prophet Isaiah said that we're like sheep, he wasn't saying, man, you guys got it going on. You're so competent. No, he was saying you need a lot of help because you stray from God's path and you like to go your own way, do your own thing. But look again at verse 6, and then we'll continue on to verse 7 now. He said, all of us like sheep have strayed away. We have left God's paths to follow our own. Yet the Lord laid on him, speaking of Jesus, the sins of us all. He was oppressed and treated harshly, yet he never said a word. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. And as a sheep is silent before the shearers, he did not open his mouth. Man, have you ever been hurt or mistreated or rejected or overlooked or unjustly criticized or maybe just misunderstood? Well, Jesus understands what that's like. It was prophesied of him in the verses right before this, in verses 3 through 5. Isaiah said, he was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised and we did not care. Yet it was our weaknesses he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. And we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. But he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. This is what Jesus did for us. So when we look during Christmas time and we look at the sweet nativity scenes, and it's also wonderful, and look at little baby born in the manger, it's just easy to think, yeah, that was an important event, but it happened so long ago. I mean, what does it really mean for me today? I mean, I get that Jesus came and he was born and he died on the cross and he rose again, but what does that really mean for my life right now? Why should I follow Jesus? Why should I devote my life to him like these church people do? Well, the thing is, when you understand the magnitude of what Jesus did, of the suffering that he endured, of the love that is so deep that he has for humanity, there's no way that you can just kind of casually say, yeah, I'm a Christian and I just, I go to church when I have time, and yeah, sometimes we may pray over the food or something if somebody wants to. Yeah, it's whatever. No, when you truly understand what Jesus has done for us and you can actually feel it, the only reasonable response is to give our lives to him, to completely follow him. When we truly see and understand what he's done. Think about how Jesus suffered. You can start just with the Garden of Gethsemane. That was where Jesus, towards the end of his ministry, at the night when he was betrayed, the night he was arrested, the night before he was crucified, that he was in this garden and he prayed. And he said in Matthew 26:38, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. This is suffering. This is anxiety. And maybe some of us have been there before, that you've felt that type of elephant sitting on your chest, that your soul is just crushed. And then he said to his heavenly Father in the next verse, in verse 39, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. because he knew the level of suffering that he was about to face. He was fully man, but he was fully God, and he understood what was coming and what he was about to endure. In fact, he was under such stress that he started to sweat drops of blood. And in modern times, we've found out that this is actually a real medical condition. It's called hematidrosis. And it can happen when you experience such extreme trauma or extreme stress that your capillaries burst and your blood mixes with your sweat. So Jesus was so anxious that he said, God, can we do this any other way? Is there another road? Is there another way to do this? But then he declared faithfully in verse 39, yet I want your will to be done, not mine. What you want, Lord, not what I want. Then after the garden, he really, towards the end of that time, his betrayer came. He was betrayed by one of his own followers, one of his own friends, Judas. And then he'd be arrested, and he'd be falsely accused, and he'd be unfairly tried. And then he would be sentenced to a terrible death by crucifixion, even though he did nothing wrong. And so sometimes even this whole experience of Jesus dying on the cross can get glossed up, can be made nice because we have jewelry and we have images and we have things on walls, and we don't really think of it in its gruesome way that much. Maybe occasionally on Good Friday we talk about it, but let's never forget what exactly Jesus dying on the cross meant and what a death by crucifixion was really about. First, they would strip him naked, and he was publicly exposed. He was humiliated. He was alone. Then they would whip him again and again. Then they would push the crown of thorns down on his head, and they would start beating him ruthlessly and spitting on him, punching him in the face. Isaiah, in another part of his book, implies that they pulled out Jesus' beard, just out of his face. Can't even imagine the pain that was. But it was so bad that he was so disfigured that they couldn't recognize him as Jesus anymore. The people that knew what he looked like couldn't tell it was him. And then, while he was now weakened and suffering and alone, they made him carry the crossbeam of the cross that would be vertical and horizontal. They made him carry the horizontal part, which was 70 to 90 pounds on his shoulders, and walk this half-mile path from where they were to where they would crucify him. And that path is now known as the way of suffering, because Jesus, in his broken down, beaten up state, with a back that's just been torn to ribbons, with probably organs exposed, and beaten up face, and bloodied head, and so on and so on. He now had to carry this 70 to 90 pound cross to the hill called Golgotha to be crucified. Then they would take the nails. These were 7 to 9 inch nails. They weren't thin nails. They were like railroad spikes. And they would drive them into his wrists and in his feet. And then they would hang him up on the cross, where his back that was so bloody and exposed would then rub against that rough wood. And the only way that he could breathe was to pull himself up with his wrists and to push up on his feet, which with all of the nerves and those nails going through would have been excruciating. But that was the only way that he could even catch a breath. And so it wouldn't be long, the scholars say, till when you're hanging in that point, that everything would start to become dislocated. His wrists, his shoulders, his elbows would all become dislocated. It's gruesome. Sometimes you may see occasionally an image of Jesus on the cross where his arms are extra long and extended, and that's the image there of things that have been dislocated. It's gruesome. So he would barely be able to catch his breath, and he would be hanging there in the heat of the day, and he was shamefully exposed, and it was the creation looking up and mocking the Creator, the Son of God, hanging on the cross as creation laughed and made fun. And really, that was only the beginning, because the most painful part was when this one who had never sinned, when he bore the sins of the whole world and became everything vile and evil and filthy and unholy, and then God the Father, in his righteousness and in his holiness, who could not look upon sin, when he turned and he pulled away and he didn't look at Jesus. And then that intimate fellowship that Jesus had always known with his Father, when it was broken. And that's when Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He was alone. He felt alone. So then that's when the Roman soldiers offered him the wine mixed with myrrh, the very thing that they would use to embalm him after his death. But he basically said, "No, I don't want something to numb the pain. I want to bear the full weight of this, and I want to finish what my Father God sent me to do." And then it was after 6 hours of hanging there on the cross that he finally declared, "It is finished. Into your hands I commit my spirit." And he gave up his life. And so this prophet Isaiah, 700 years before any of this ever took place, prophetically declared what this innocent child who was born of a virgin, who never sinned, what he would endure on our behalf. And so he continues in Isaiah 53, verse 8, speaking of this suffering servant, speaking of Jesus, he says, "Unjustly condemned, he was led away. No one cared that he died without descendants, that his life was cut short in midstream. But he was struck down for the rebellion of my people. He had done no wrong and had never deceived anyone, but he was buried like a criminal. He was put in a rich man's grave." Now, it's interesting here because remember, Isaiah is 700 years before, but he's talking about this future event like it's happened already. It's in the past. Do you see that? That in his mind, he's seeing what the Lord is revealing, and it's already happened. I think it's also interesting that how did Isaiah know that a rich man would offer his unused grave? Because as the story goes, a rich man named Joseph of Arimathea would offer his grave, his tomb, for them to put Jesus in. And Isaiah knew that, even down to that detail of a rich man. Verse 11, when he sees, speaking of Jesus, when he sees all that is accomplished by his anguish, he will be satisfied. And because of his experience, my righteous servant, speaking of the Father, speaking here, my righteous servant will make it possible for many to be counted righteous, for he will bear all their sins. That's what he did for us. Think about it for a minute. What is it that sets Christianity apart from all the other world religions? What sets it apart from Islam and Buddhism and New Age and Hinduism and all those things? It's that we are saved by grace through the bloody death of an innocent victim who happened to be God himself, who gave himself up. That's what sets it apart. And it goes all the way back to the Old Testament, to something known as the Passover. This was the time when God instructed the Hebrews, who, while they were in slavery in Egypt, that they would need to kill a lamb and take some of the blood and put it on the doorposts, on the top going across and on the beams coming down, to put the blood of the lamb on the doorposts. Because God's judgment was going to come by. His judgment would pass by their house in the form of this death angel. And if they had the blood of the lamb over their doorposts, the angel would pass by and no one would be harmed. But if they didn't, then the firstborn in that home would pass away. The death angel would take them. So a family would be saved because of the blood of the lamb in that first Passover. You see the parallel of what Jesus is doing here. But when you think about it, It seems unfair, right? That this innocent lamb would pass away, would have to be killed. And yet, all the way back to this ancient ritual, we see God foreshadowing. When this blood was put on the doorpost, it was a foreshadowing of the bloody cross that the Lamb of God would shed his blood for the forgiveness of sins. That there was payment. That it wasn't an animal anymore, but it was the Lamb of God. It was Jesus. It was the Son of God, God himself. So when we picture the wise men giving Jesus this gift of myrrh, the substance used to embalm the dead, we can see how God was foreshadowing even there what was to come, that the Lamb of God would be slain for the sins of the world. And even during Jesus' ministry, he understood this, and the disciples didn't get it, but Jesus prophesied what was going to happen to him. He knew, long before the cross, he knew what was coming. In Luke chapter 9, verse 22, he says, "The Son of Man," that's himself, that was one of his titles, "must suffer many terrible things," he said. "He will be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He will be killed, but on the third day he will be raised from the dead." Then he said to the crowd, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross daily and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it." It's an example of what we call the upside-down kingdom, that things in the kingdom of God are often backwards of what they are in our world. But see, Jesus did not say to just pray some prayer and then you're going to be healthy and wealthy every day of your life from this point out. That's not what he said. He didn't say you just pray this quick little prayer of salvation, "Forgive me, Lord," and then you just do whatever you want because your buddy Jesus, he's cool with it. It's okay. Grace, grace, grace. Do whatever. Just say the prayer, believe in God, and you're good. No, that's not what he said. What he said was, if you want to be my follower, you got to deny yourself. Because this whole world isn't about you anyways. Deny yourself. Boy, that's not a popular message today. Then he said to take up your cross. In other words, to die to yourself. Well, what does that mean? Like physically die? It might mean that to some. Where this world is headed, it might mean more of that to more of us. But there's also other ways. Die to yourself, meaning dying to your own agenda, to your own goals, your own plans, your own ways, your own dreams and aspirations. Submitting all of those to the Lord, dying to myself. I'm not in this for my kingdom, to make my name great, to have a big legacy of generations and all that stuff. No, Jesus said, if you want to follow me, deny yourself, take up your cross. Follow me. See, this whole thing of serving the Lord, it's not a cultural thing that we are Christian because we're American. No. It's not a hobby. It's not an add-on to make our lives better. It's not something that just makes us feel all warm and fuzzy while we celebrate Santa Claus and go to Grandma's house and look at the nativity set and just feel real good about things. No. It's God becoming flesh and living a sinless life, a perfect life, and then dying in our place, and then rising from the dead. That's an important part of the story too. And when we really get that at our core, when we really get that deep inside us, Jesus should take center stage in our lives. Center stage. He should actually redefine who we are. Our identity shifts. Sorry, I think the myrrh's coming this way. It redefines us because Jesus did all of this. He endured the cross. He stood in our place for me and for you, for all of our junk, our pride, our lustfulness, our hypocrisy, our judgmental attitudes, our rage, our unforgiveness, our wickedness, our wicked hearts. He stood in our place. And God sent wise men to give Jesus myrrh, foreshadowing of what was to come, that this child was being born so that he could die. It's called the gospel because it's good news that our God would actually do this, that he would come and die in our place. I don't follow Jesus because I have to. I don't follow Jesus because I just don't want to go to hell one day. I don't follow Jesus because it makes me a better person or because it gives me something to do on Sundays that feels religious. I don't follow Jesus because of that. I follow Jesus because of who he is. Thank you. Who he is because of his love for us, for me. I follow him because of what he did 2,000 years ago on the cross. I follow him because he didn't stay dead, that he rose again. So I'm not serving some dead martyr that we just kind of have a ritual where we pay homage to. No. He's alive. He's alive. After all that suffering and pain, he rose again. So I serve him for what he did. Serve him because he's risen. And I serve him because he has an eternal plan, an eternal home for his people. That there is great hope. Whatever is going on in the world, whatever's going on in your world, there is great hope because of what Jesus did, that he chose to do. He died and rose again. And one day, he's going to be a returning king. And he's going to come in victory and in power. And he's going to set things right. And he's going to bring ultimate peace to this world. So I want us today to close by just thanking the Lord together. By having a moment to just stop and thank him. Because I know how it is. We get busy and we get shopping for gifts and we got parties and we got all the decor and the lights and all those fun things, and we do it with our kids and it's great. But let's not forget to just stop and say, thank you, Jesus. Thanksgiving's over, but did you know it's okay to thank the Lord after Thanksgiving? It's okay. So I actually want to end in two different ways. I want to pause and pray and just thank the Lord in a simple way. But then I also want to do another prayer, and I'll share that with you in a minute. So can we stand together and we'll close in prayer. Just wanted to give you this chance to just say thank you, Lord. In light of everything we've talked about today, in light of what Isaiah told us about this suffering servant, in light of all the foreshadowing that took place before Jesus, let's just pause and say thank you. Lord, we come to you just refocused, remembering what this season is really about. It's really about what happened when you left heaven and you interrupted history, that you changed eternity, that you came to this earth, and from the moment you were born, your destiny was to die in a gruesome way, in a terrible way, but not just to die, but to carry the weight of all of our sin, past, present, and future, for all time and all people, to carry that weight, Lord. So we just want to say thank you. Thank you that we didn't deserve it and we can't earn it. But your love is beyond what we can even understand and what we can know. Just thank you, Jesus, for this season. We celebrate you, and as we remember the gifts that the wise men brought, we'll give gifts to each other. We'll have a good time with family, but right now we just want to pause and remember you and what you've done. Thank you, Lord. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen. Now, before we go, I do want to have one other prayer together. I keep hearing, especially the last week or two, that there's a lot of sickness going on. A lot of people are out sick with all the different things that are out there now. The flu, which I guess that's a thing again. The flu came back from vacation and is now a thing. Obviously, COVID. There's another one. What is it? RSV is big now. So we have some people out today that may be watching us, joining us online, and we want to pray for you online if you're not able to be with us. But I know a lot of family members are sick. There's been one that found out a sibling has serious cancer. So I wanted to end today just by praying over the sick. So let me call our prayer team and our elder team up front. And we're just going to believe God for some miracles. So as they're coming, I'm going to invite you today, if you or your family member, someone in your house or, in your circle is dealing with a sickness or some kind of condition or cancer or whatever, and you want to see them be healed, we want to pray over you today. That's all we're going to do is just pray over you. Not going to make a scene or anything. We just want to believe God together because we believe God is a healing God. And when he came and he died for us, we now have things that are open to us. There are things that the Lord has provided for us. One of them is healing. And while we can't guarantee every person will be healed, we know that God does heal. And so we want to believe with you. So if you have somebody in your life or in your home that's sick, would you just raise your hand and let us know? Got somebody. Yeah, it's all over. So look, if you're just raising your hand, let me just invite you to come forward. There's plenty of us in the room. You're not going to be singled out. Just come forward and you can line up here.